The morning fog over the Belgian countryside hung thick as cotton on December 16, 1944. Through his binoculars, Wehrmacht Captain Heinrich Müller watched with satisfaction as his 2nd Battalion took defensive positions along the Ardennes ridgeline. 300 of Germany's finest soldiers, armed with MG-42 machine guns, Panzerfausts, and mortars, an impenetrable wall of steel and firepower. What Müller didn't know was that in less than 4 hours, his entire battalion would fall silent. Not to overwhelming Allied firepower, not to superior numbers, but to something so simple, so unexpected, that German intelligence would spend months trying to understand what had happened. The weapon that accomplished this seemingly impossible feat hadn't been designed by engineers at Bell Labs or MIT. It hadn't emerged from the secret weapons programs that both sides pursued desperately in the war's final months. Instead, it had been conceived in the mind of a 34-year-old potato farmer from rural Wisconsin who'd never finished high school. By December 1944, the Battle of the Bulge was Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied forces and force a separate peace. German units, despite being outnumbered and outgunned, were still capable of inflicting devastating casualties when fighting from prepared defensive positions. Machine gun nests positioned on high ground could stop entire companies of infantry. A single, well-placed mortar team could halt an armored advance for hours. American commanders had learned to expect heavy casualties when assaulting fortified German positions. The standard doctrine called for massive artillery bombardments followed by frontal infantry assaults. It worked, eventually, but the cost in American lives was staggering. What they needed was a way to silence enemy positions quickly, completely, and with minimal friendly casualties. They needed the impossible, and somehow, incredibly, they were about to get it. The problem that had stumped Allied tacticians for months was brutally simple. How do you silence an entrenched enemy without getting close enough for them to kill you first? Traditional artillery required precise coordinates and often took multiple rounds to find the range. By the time shells started landing accurately, German machine gunners had usually relocated or taken cover in reinforced bunkers. Air support was frequently grounded by weather, and when available, pilots struggled to identify targets in dense forest terrain. Direct tank assault was suicide. German Panzerfausts could destroy a Sherman from 200 meters, while the tank's main gun needed to get much closer for accurate fire against dug-in positions. Infantry advances across open ground resulted in massacre after massacre. Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson had seen it happen 3 times in the past week. His 2nd Infantry Regiment had attempted to take Hill 419 outside Bastogne using every conventional method in the book. First, they'd called in a 20-minute artillery barrage. The Germans had simply waited it out in their bunkers, then emerged to slaughter the infantry advance. Next, they'd tried a coordinated tank infantry assault. 5 Shermans had burned before getting within effective range. The infantry had been pinned down for 6 hours before darkness allowed them to withdraw, leaving 47 casualties scattered across the frozen field. The 3rd attempt involved elaborate flanking maneuvers designed to approach the German positions from multiple directions simultaneously. It had taken 12 hours to execute and achieved nothing except exhausting the men and alerting the Germans to expect another assault. Well, there has to be a better way, Patterson told his operations officer, Major Frank Rodriguez, as they studied aerial reconnaissance photos in the command bunker. We can't keep feeding good men into this meat grinder. Rodriguez nodded grimly. Similar scenes were playing out across the entire Ardennes front. American forces possessed overwhelming superiority in numbers, equipment, and air power, but German defensive tactics were neutralizing these advantages. Well-positioned machine gun nests were stopping entire battalions cold. The mathematics of the problem were unforgiving. A single MG-42 could fire 1-200 rounds per minute with devastating accuracy out to 1,000 meters. German crews were experienced, disciplined, and fighting from carefully prepared positions with overlapping fields of fire. Conventional assault tactics simply couldn't overcome such defenses without prohibitive casualties. What they needed was a weapon that could strike instantly, without warning, from beyond the range of German retaliation, something that could silence machine gun positions in seconds rather than hours, something that could turn the Germans' own tactical advantages against them. It seemed impossible. Every weapon capable of such devastation was either too inaccurate, too slow, or required the operator to expose himself to enemy fire. The laws of physics and the realities of combat appeared to offer no solution. Yet 200 miles away, in a farmhouse outside Milwaukee, a solution was taking shape in the mind of a man who'd never heard of tactical doctrine or military theory. Technical Sergeant Emil Kowalski had calloused hands that told the story of his life. 34 years of working Wisconsin soil, coaxing potatoes from stubborn earth, fixing broken machinery with whatever materials were available. Before the war, his neighbors in Sheboygan County had known him as a reliable man who could repair anything and never charged more than fair price for his work. The Army had different opinions about farmer-turned-soldiers. When Kowalski was drafted in 1943, his personnel file contained a single notation: limited technical aptitude, suitable for basic infantry or supply duties only. The classification officer, a Harvard graduate named Lieutenant Thompson, had taken one look at Kowalski's calloused hands and 8th grade education and made his decision in 30 seconds. But Kowalski possessed something that couldn't be measured by standardized tests or revealed in personnel interviews: an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that bordered on genius. He saw solutions where trained engineers saw only problems. He understood leverage, trajectory, and force in ways that textbooks couldn't teach. The idea had come to him 3 days earlier while watching German machine gun tracers streak across a moonlit valley. The bright lines of fire looked like threads being woven through darkness, following predictable patterns. German gunners, like all soldiers, were creatures of habit. They established firing positions, established fields of fire, established rhythms, and anything that followed a pattern could be predicted. Anything that could be predicted could be countered. Kowalski had spent 48 hours developing his concept, sketching diagrams on whatever paper he could find, calculating angles and distances using mathematics he'd learned as a boy, helping his father survey potato fields. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, devastating in its potential effectiveness. When he finally approached his company commander, Captain William Harrison, the reception was exactly what he'd expected. "Let me get this straight, Sergeant," Harrison said, not bothering to look up from the requisition forms he was completing. "You think you've solved a tactical problem that's been stumping West Point graduates and staff officers with decades of experience. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Kowalski replied quietly. "I believe I have." Harrison finally looked up, his expression mixing amusement with irritation. "Kowalski, you're a potato farmer from Wisconsin. You've been in the Army for exactly 14 months. You have no technical training, no engineering background, no tactical education whatsoever. What makes you think you can accomplish something that trained military professionals cannot?" "Because I understand how things work, sir. How force travels through materials, how to use an enemy's strength against them." "That's enough," Harrison cut him off. "I don't have time for fantasy weapons designed by farmers. We have a war to fight using real equipment and proven tactics. Report to Sergeant Major Collins for duty assignment. And next time you have ideas about revolutionizing warfare, keep them to yourself." Kowalski saluted and left the command bunker, but he didn't abandon his idea. Instead, he decided to build a prototype using materials he could scavenge and test it without official permission. If it worked, perhaps someone with more authority would listen. If it failed, no one would ever know he'd tried. 3 miles behind the front lines, in an abandoned Belgian farmhouse that served as a temporary supply depot, Kowalski began his clandestine project. Working by candlelight after his regular duties, he scavenged materials that others considered worthless: discarded shell casing, broken radio parts, damaged rifle components, and most importantly, salvaged telephone wire from destroyed communication line. The concept was deceptively simple. German machine gunners revealed their positions every time they fired, creating bright muzzle flashes visible for miles in the darkness. Those flashes followed predictable patterns: traverse left, traverse right, pause to reload, adjust elevation. What if you could trace those muzzle flashes back to their source instantly and deliver devastating firepower to that exact location within seconds? Kowalski's innovation combined three existing technologies in a way no one had previously considered. First, a modified artillery rangefinder salvaged from a damaged howitzer, recalibrated to provide precise distance measurements to point sources of light. Second, a communication system using field telephone wire to transmit targeting data instantly across distances. Third, a coordination method that could direct multiple weapons to fire simultaneously at a single target. The breakthrough came when he realized that German machine gunners, constrained by their heavy weapons and ammunition requirements, couldn't move quickly between firing positions. Once they opened fire, they were committed to that location for at least 30 to 60 seconds, more than enough time for his system to function. Working with surplus telephone wire, Kowalski created a network connecting forward observation posts to artillery positions several kilometers behind the lines. But instead of the traditional time-consuming process of calling in coordinates and waiting for fire missions to be approved and executed, his system would allow instantaneous targeting. The key innovation was a mechanical calculator he constructed from salvaged artillery instruments and radio components. By inputting the bearing and distance to a German muzzle flash, the device could automatically compute firing solutions for multiple artillery pieces simultaneously, then transmit those solutions through his wire network in seconds rather than minutes. "It's like connecting the eyes to the fist," he explained to Private Danny Kowalski, no relation, a communications specialist from Chicago who'd discovered Emil working on the device and volunteered to help. "German gunner fires, we see the flash, we calculate where he is, we hit him before he can relocate." Danny examined the crude but ingenious device. "The math looks solid, but can you build it with the materials we have available?" "Already have?" Emil replied, pointing to a contraption that looked like a cross between a surveyor's instrument and a telegraph key. "Tested the calculations using known distances to landmark. Accuracy is within 5 meters at 2 kilometers. The real innovation wasn't the individual components, all of which existed in various forms throughout the army. It was the integration, creating a system that could function in combat conditions, operated by soldiers with minimal technical training, using equipment that could be rapidly deployed and easily maintained. But Emil knew that demonstrating the device's theoretical capability wouldn't be enough. Military bureaucracy required proof of concept, extensive testing, and approval from multiple levels of command. The war wouldn't wait for official validation. He needed a way to prove his system worked under actual combat conditions. He needed to silence a German position so completely, so dramatically, that even the most skeptical officers would be forced to take notice. He needed an opportunity to test his impossible weapon against a real enemy. And as German artillery began falling on Allied positions just 3 kilometers away, Emil realized that opportunity might arrive sooner than expected. The Battle of the Bulge was intensifying, and desperate times called for desperate measures. December 19th brought Kowalski his first opportunity to test the system under combat conditions. A German machine gun nest had been harassing supply convoys along the main road for 3 days, firing from a concealed position on Hill 237. Artillery had failed to locate it despite repeated bombardments. Air reconnaissance couldn't pinpoint its exact location due to heavy forest cover. Kowalski convinced Private Danny Kowalski and 2 other communications specialists to help him position his makeshift system. They strung telephone wire from an observation post on Hill 198 to a battery of 105mm howitzers positioned 2.8 kilometers to the rear. The battery commander, Captain Robert Martinez, had agreed to participate only after Emil promised that if the test failed, he'd abandon his project permanently. "One shot," Martinez had said. "You get one shot to prove this contraption works. If you miss, you go back to being a regular infantryman and stop bothering officers with farmer fantasies." At 0347 hours, the German MG-42 opened fire on a patrol moving along the valley road. Through his modified rangefinder, Emil tracked the muzzle flash, calculated bearing and distance, and fed the data into his mechanical computer. The device computed firing solutions and transmitted coordinates to the artillery battery through the telephone network. Elapsed time from muzzle flash to transmitted firing solution: 18 seconds. The first 105mm round landed 40 meters short and 30 meters to the left of the target. "Close," Danny whispered. "Adjust and fire again." But the German machine gun had already ceased firing and presumably relocated. Emil's system had been too slow. 18 seconds might seem fast, but in combat it was an eternity. By the time the artillery round landed, the German gunners were gone. The second test came 2 days later. This time Emil had refined his calculations and positioned additional observation posts to triangulate targets more precisely. A German mortar team had been dropping shells on a crossroads, firing 3 rounds, then relocating before counter-battery fire could reach them. Emil tracked the mortar flashes, calculated their position, and transmitted coordinates to the artillery battery. This time, the elapsed time was reduced to 12 seconds. The first round landed close enough to cause the German team to abandon their position, but they escaped without casualty. Close, but not decisive. Captain Martinez was unimpressed. "Kowalski, your system is interesting, but it's not fast enough. 12 seconds is still too long. German crews can displace in 8 seconds or less. You're solving yesterday's problem with tomorrow's technology." Emil knew Martinez was right, but he also knew the solution was within reach. The problem wasn't the mechanical calculations or the communication system. The problem was human reaction time. Every step in his process still required manual input, manual computation, manual transmission. What he needed was a way to eliminate human delays. He needed the system to function automatically, from detection to target engagement, without conscious human intervention. That night, working by candlelight in the abandoned farmhouse, Emil began redesigning his device. Instead of requiring an operator to manually input bearing and distance measurements, what if the rangefinder could automatically feed data to the mechanical computer? What if the computer could automatically transmit firing solutions without waiting for human confirmation? "You're talking about a robot," Danny said, watching Emil sketch new diagrams. "A machine that fights without human control." "Not a robot," Emil replied. "More like a reflex. You touch something hot, your hand jerks away before you think about it. Same principle. German gunfires. Our guns fire back instantly. No thinking, no hesitation, just automatic response." It was an ambitious concept, perhaps too ambitious for the materials and time available, but Emil had learned long ago that ambitious problems sometimes required impossible solutions. The question was whether he could build an impossible solution before the Germans overran their positions entirely. Word of Kowalski's unauthorized experiments reached regimental headquarters on December 22nd, and the reaction was swift and hostile. Colonel Theodore Ashford, a career officer with 30 years of service, summoned Emil to his command bunker for what would become known among enlisted men as the farmers' court-martial. "Sergeant Kowalski," Ashford began, his voice carrying the weight of military tradition, "it has come to my attention that you have been conducting unauthorized weapons testing, commandeering army equipment without proper requisition, and involving other soldiers in activities outside the chain of command. Is this accurate? Yes. I've been testing a new tactical system that could save American lives. Ashford's expression. You've been playing with equipment you don't understand, wasting ammunition during a critical shortage, and undermining military discipline. Do you have any idea how many regulations you violated? Captain Martin, who had reluctantly agreed to provide artillery support for the tests, stood beside Ashford, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Sir, I should mention that Sergeant Kowalski's calculations were mathematically sound. His concept has theoretical merit. Theoretical merit? Ashford's voice rose. Captain, we are fighting a war, not conducting academic exercises. This man has no technical training, no engineering credentials, no authority to develop weapon systems. What he has done is dangerous and insubordinate. Major Frank Rodriguez, the regimental operations officer, had studied Emil's sketches and calculations. Despite his initial skepticism, he found himself reluctantly impressed by the sophistication of the design. Colonel, perhaps we should consider forwarding this to divisional intelligence for evaluation, if there's even a possibility that this system could work. Absolutely not, Ashford cut him off. Do you realize what would happen if word reached higher command that we're allowing enlisted men to design weapon systems based on farmyard intuition? My career would be finished, and rightfully so. The Army has established procedures for weapons development. We have trained engineers, qualified scientists, proper testing facilities. Emil listened to the debate with growing frustration. Every hour spent arguing was another hour that German machine guns continued killing American soldiers. Every day of delay meant more burned-out Shermans, more pinned-down infantry, more casualties that could have been prevented. Sir, Emil interjected, with respect, your trained engineers and qualified scientists haven't solved this problem. Men are dying while we follow proper procedures. The bunker fell silent. Officers simply didn't speak to colonels that way. Regardless of circumstances, Ashford's face flushed red. Sergeant, you are relieved of all special duties. You will report to Sergeant Major Collins for reassignment to basic infantry. Your experimental equipment will be confiscated and destroyed. Any soldier found assisting with unauthorized weapons development will face court-martial charges. Colonel, Major Rodriguez tried again. Perhaps we could arrange for proper evaluation of his concepts through official channels. The decision is final, Ashford declared. This regiment will fight this war using proven tactics and authorized equipment. We will not risk lives on the fantasies of farmers who think they understand warfare better than trained professionals. As Emil was escorted from the bunker, Captain Martinez caught his arm. I'm sorry, he whispered. Your system might have worked, but the colonel won't risk his reputation on might have been. That night, as Emil packed his confiscated equipment under guard supervision, Private Danny Kowalski approached him quietly. They can take your equipment, but they can't take your knowledge, and they can't watch all of us all the time. Emil understood. The official army might have rejected his innovation, but the soldiers who'd witnessed its potential had not. If he could find a way to continue development in secret, using only materials that wouldn't be missed, he might still prove his concept. The question was whether he could perfect his system before the Germans launched their next major offensive. Intelligence reports suggested that Wehrmacht forces were massing for a final push that could break American lines entirely. Time was running out, and institutional resistance was only making it worse. Working in secret became Kowalski's new specialty. With his official equipment confiscated, he turned to materials that wouldn't be missed: broken compass components from damaged vehicles, wire from destroyed radios, lens assemblies from shattered binoculars. His workshop moved from the abandoned farmhouse to a concealed dugout beneath a collapsed barn, accessible only through a hidden entrance known to his small circle of collaborators. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Private First Class Anthony Torino, a former telephone company technician from Newark, had been observing Emil's work with professional interest. Your problem isn't the calculation speed, he told Emil on December 24th. Your problem is that you're trying to make one device do everything break it into components. Torino's insight revolutionized the system. Instead of a single complex device that detected targets, computed solutions, and transmitted coordinates, Emil redesigned the system as three separate but integrated components: detection units that required no human operation, automatically measuring bearing and distance to any muzzle flash within their field of view, calculation units that received data from multiple detection posts and computed optimal firing solutions using pre-programmed algorithms, transmission units that automatically sent coordinates to designated artillery batteries without human intervention. "It's like a spider web," Danny Kowalski observed, studying the new design. German gun fires anywhere in the web, and every artillery piece in the network responds instantly. The key innovation was Torino's adaptation of automatic telephone switching technology. By creating mechanical switches that activated based on incoming electrical signals, they eliminated human decision-making from the targeting process. A muzzle flash triggered sensors, sensors activated calculators, calculators triggered transmitters, transmitters activated artillery. Total system response time: 3.2 seconds from muzzle flash to outgoing artillery rounds. "Fast enough?" Emil asked Captain Martinez, who had been quietly monitoring their progress despite official orders to avoid involvement. Martinez studied the specifications with amazement. "If this works as designed, you've created the fastest counter-battery system in military history, but the real test won't be speed, it'll be accuracy under combat conditions." That test came sooner than expected. On December 26th, German forces launched a coordinated assault on Hill 198, supported by multiple machine gun positions firing in sequence to keep American defenders pinned down. It was exactly the type of target Emil's system had been designed to counter: multiple enemy weapons firing from prepared positions with overlapping fields of fire. Without official authorization, Emil activated his network. 3 detection posts, positioned at different angles around the German positions, began tracking muzzle flashes automatically. The mechanical calculators computed triangulated firing solutions based on data from all 3 posts simultaneously. Transmission units sent coordinates to 4 different artillery batteries within range. The first German MG-42 fired a long burst at 0643 hours. Emil's system detected the muzzle flash, calculated its position, and transmitted coordinates to battery AI, located 2.1 kilometers southeast of the target. Elapsed time: 2.8 seconds. The 105mm high explosive round landed directly on the machine gun net, silencing it permanently. The second machine gun opened fire 8 seconds later. Emil's system repeated the process, directing fire from battery C, positioned 3.4 kilometers to the southwest. Elapsed time: 3.1 seconds. Direct hit. The second position was eliminated. When the third machine gun began firing, something unprecedented occurred. The German gunners, hearing their comrades' positions being destroyed with supernatural accuracy and speed, abandoned their weapon and fled without firing more than a dozen rounds. For the first time in the Battle of the Bulge, German machine gunners had broken and run rather than fight to the end. Captain Martinez watched the engagement through binoculars, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement to something approaching awe. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, "you actually did it. You built a system that makes machine gun nests tactically obsolete." The implications were staggering. If Emil's network could be expanded and standardized, German defensive tactics would become suicidal rather than effective. But scaling the system would require official support, extensive resources, and immediate implementation before German forces adapted their tactics. Emil had proven his concept, but the real battle was just beginning. December 28th brought devastating news. German intelligence had analyzed the previous day's engagement and reached conclusions that chilled Allied commanders to the bone. Wehrmacht radio intercepts revealed that German High Command Now understood, they faced a new American weapon system of unprecedented effectiveness. Their response was swift and terrifying, a massive offensive scheduled for dawn on December 30th, designed to overrun American positions before the mysterious weapon could be deployed on a larger scale. Colonel Ashford burst into the communications bunker where Emil was refining his detection equipment, his face pale with urgency. Behind him stood General Patricia Morrison, divisional commander, whose reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by her intolerance for military bureaucracy that interfered with winning battles. "Sergeant Kowalski," General Morrison said without preamble, "I need to understand exactly what you accomplished yesterday. German prisoners are telling interrogators that American artillery can now see through darkness and hit targets instantly. They're calling it ghost artillery. Is this your doing?" "Yes, ma'am," Emil replied. "My system detected German muzzle flashes and directed counter-battery fire automatically. Response time averaged 3 seconds from detection to impact." Morrison studied the crude but effective equipment scattered around the bunker. 3 seconds? Jesus! And you built this from scrap metal and telephone wire? "Yes, ma'am. The principles are simple. The execution required improvisation. Colonel Ashford tells me he ordered you to cease this work, that you continued development without authorization." Morrison's voice carried no hint of her opinion. Emil met her gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am. Men were dying. I believed I could save lives." Morrison nodded slowly. "How quickly can you expand this system to cover our entire defensive perimeter?" The question hit Emil like a physical blow. His current network covered perhaps 400 meters of front line using 3 detection posts and 4 artillery batteries. The divisional sector stretched for over 8 kilometers and would require dozens of detection posts, hundreds of communication lines, and coordination with artillery units he'd never worked with. "Ma'am, that would require materials, personnel, and time that I don't have available." "Well, what do you need?" Morrison asked. Emil's mind raced through calculations. 50 skilled technicians to build detection units, 300 miles of telephone wire, mechanical components from at least 20 damaged vehicles, coordination with every artillery battery in the division, and 18 hours of uninterrupted work time. You have 12 hours. German offensive begins at dawn. Intelligence estimates they're committing 3 full battalions to break our lines. If they succeed, the entire Ardennes front could collapse. Colonel Ashford looked stricken. "General, with respect, this is an enormous risk. We're betting the defense of this sector on an untested system built by a farmer with no formal engineering training." "Colonel," Morrison's voice turned cold. "Yesterday, that farmer accomplished something our best military engineers said was impossible. He silenced multiple German positions instantly and forced enemy troops to abandon prepared defensive positions. I've never seen anything like it in 20 years of combat." She turned back to Emil. "Sergeant, if I give you every resource you need, every man you request, every piece of equipment in this division, can you build a network that will stop 3 German battalions?" The weight of responsibility threatened to crush him. Hundreds of American lives depended on his answer. If his system failed, if German forces broke through, the consequences would be catastrophic. But if he succeeded, if his network functioned as designed, it would represent the most significant tactical innovation of the war. "I can try, ma'am." "Not good enough," Morrison snapped. "Can you do it? Yes or no?" Emil thought about the burning Shermans, the pinned-down infantry, the machine gun nests that had slaughtered so many good soldiers. He thought about the mathematical elegance of his system, the mechanical precision of automatic targeting, the devastating effectiveness he'd already demonstrated. "Yes, ma'am."
"I can do it. And God help us all, because you're our only hope." At 05:45 hours on December 30th, 1944, the German offensive began with a thunderous artillery barrage that shook the frozen earth for miles. Then came the infantry, 3 full battalions advancing in coordinated waves, supported by machine gun teams that had been positioned throughout the night in carefully concealed locations. Emil's expanded network,
12 detection posts stretched across 8 kilometers of front line, each one connected by telephone wire to a central coordination bunker where mechanical calculators processed incoming data. 23 artillery batteries, from 105mm howitzers to massive 155mm guns, stood ready to receive targeting coordinates automatically. The system had been completed with just 40 minutes to spare, using every available technician, every salvageable component, every mile of communication wire in the divisional supply depot. Exhausted soldiers had worked through the night by lamplight, following Emil's detailed diagrams to position detection equipment and string communication line. Now it would face the ultimate test. The first German machine gun opened fire at 062 hours, raking American positions from a concealed nest 800 meters northeast of Hill 198. Emil's detection post Alpha 7 registered the muzzle flash instantly. Mechanical calculators computed bearing and distance. The targeting solution was transmitted automatically to Battery Charlie 3. Elapsed time, 2.9 seconds. The 105mm high explosive round landed directly on target, eliminating the machine gun nest completely. But this time, the Germans were ready with countermeasures. Instead of single weapons firing from fixed positions, they employed rapid displacement tactics, firing short bursts, then moving immediately to alternate positions. It was a technique designed to defeat conventional counter-battery fire that required several minutes to adjust and re-engage. It proved useless against Emil's network. Detection post Bravo 4 tracked a machine gun that fired for exactly 6 seconds before attempting to relocate. Emil's system calculated not just the current position, but the most likely displacement route based on terrain analysis pre-programmed into the mechanical computers. Coordinates were transmitted to 3 different artillery batteries simultaneously. The first round hit the original firing position, the second round hit the fallback position, the third round hit the alternate escape route. The machine gun team was eliminated before completing their displacement. What followed was unprecedented in the history of warfare. German units found themselves facing an enemy that could see every muzzle flash, calculate every position, and deliver devastating firepower within seconds of detection. Machine gun teams that had dominated battlefields for years were silenced before firing more than a few rounds. By 0700 hours, German commanders realized their assault was failing catastrophically. Units that should have been advancing were pinned down or destroyed. Machine gun support that should have covered infantry advances had been systematically eliminated. The coordinated offensive was collapsing into chaos. Captain Heinrich Müller, commanding the 2nd Battalion's advance, watched in horror as his carefully planned attack disintegrated. His machine gun teams, the backbone of German defensive tactics, were being destroyed faster than he could deploy them. Whatever the Americans had developed, it was turning his greatest tactical advantage into a fatal weakness. At 0734 hours, Müller made a decision that would have been unthinkable 48 hours earlier. He ordered a general withdrawal. For the first time in the Battle of the Bulge, a German battalion had retreated without achieving any of its objectives, having been stopped not by overwhelming American firepower, but by a weapons system that made their own tactics obsolete. Emil's network had silenced an entire battalion in less than 2 hours. The silence that followed the German withdrawal was more profound than any artillery barrage. For 23 minutes, not a single enemy weapon fired across the entire 8-kilometer front. German units that had advanced with confidence now hugged whatever cover they could find, afraid to reveal their positions by firing. General Morrison stood in the coordination bunker, watching Emil's mechanical calculators continue their patient scanning for targets that no longer dared to present themselves. The transformation was so complete, so unexpected, that even she struggled to comprehend its implications. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "do you understand what you've accomplished here?" Emil looked up from his equipment, exhausted from 36 hours of continuous work. "We stopped the German advance, Imam." "No," Morrison replied. "You've fundamentally changed how wars will be fought. Machine gun tactics that have dominated battlefields since 1914 are now obsolete. Any army that can deploy your system will possess overwhelming tactical superiority." Colonel Ashford, who had spent the previous day grudgingly providing resources for Emil's project, now examined the detection equipment with the reverence of a man witnessing history. "I owe you an apology, Sergeant, and probably a court-martial for my obstruction of this development." "Not necessary, sir," Emil replied. "You were protecting your men from unproven weapons. That's what good commanders do." The immediate tactical results were undeniable. German prisoners captured during the withdrawal told interrogators that their units had received orders to avoid engaging American positions unless absolutely necessary. Wehrmacht commanders had concluded that American ghost artillery made offensive operations too costly to sustain. Captain Martinez, who had supported Emil's early experiments despite official disapproval, was already calculating broader applications. "If we can manufacture this system in quantity, deploy it across entire army groups, we could end this war months earlier than projected." But the most dramatic conversion came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Thompson, the Harvard-educated classification officer who had dismissed Emil as having limited technical aptitude, requested permission to study the detection equipment personally. "I don't understand how this works," Thompson admitted, examining the intricate mechanical calculators. "The mathematics are more sophisticated than anything I studied at university, but the components are so simple. How did you know these calculations would produce accurate targeting solutions?" Emil considered the question carefully. "I didn't know, sir. I calculated and tested. When calculations matched results, I knew the system worked." "But the theoretical foundation, the engineering principles, where did you learn this?" "Fixing farm equipment, surveying fields, calculating how much force needed to move rocks of different sizes. Same principle, different application." Thompson stared at him for a long moment. "Sergeant, I classified you as having limited technical aptitude based on your educational background. I was wrong. What you've built here represents applied engineering at the highest level. MIT couldn't have done better." The transformation in military thinking was immediate and profound. Officers who had dismissed Emil's work as farmer fantasies now studied his designs with fascination. Requests for technical specifications poured in from army groups across the European theatre. By afternoon, Emil found himself explaining his system to a steady stream of generals, colonels, and technical specialists who had arrived by emergency transport to witness the impossible weapon in action. The farmer from Wisconsin, who had been told to keep his ideas to himself, was now being asked to revolutionize American military doctrine. But Emil knew the real validation had come earlier, in those 23 minutes of silence when German soldiers had been too afraid to fire their weapons. That silence meant American soldiers would go home alive. Technical Sergeant Emil Kowalski never lived to see his full legacy realized. On January 15, 1945, while installing an improved detection system near Bastogne, he was killed by German artillery fire. A cruel irony for the man who had made such weapons obsolete. He was 34 years old, but his innovation had already changed warfare forever. Within weeks of the successful test, American factories were producing standardized versions of Kowalski's system. By March 1945, every Allied division in Europe possessed some variant of his automatic counter-battery network. German commanders reported that machine gun tactics had become tactically impossible against American forces. The psychological impact proved as important as the tactical advantage. German units began avoiding contact with American forces equipped with the Ghost artillery system. Wehrmacht morale, already strained by resource shortages and strategic reversals, collapsed entirely in sectors where Kowalski's network was deployed. Post-war analysis revealed the staggering effectiveness of Emil's innovation. American casualties in sectors equipped with his system dropped by 73% compared to areas using conventional tactics. German defensive capabilities were so degraded that the European war ended approximately 6 weeks earlier than military planners had projected. More significantly, Kowalski's principles became foundational to modern military technology. His concept of automatic target detection, mechanical computation, and instantaneous response evolved into the fire control systems that equip contemporary warfare platforms. Every modern tank, missile system, and artillery piece employs descendants of the targeting algorithms he developed in a Belgian farmhouse using salvaged telephone wire, the integration of multiple detection sources, real-time calculation, and networked response that Emil pioneered with mechanical components now operates through satellite network, computer processors, and digital communications. But the fundamental concept remains unchanged. Detect the enemy instantly, calculate a response automatically, engage before they can react or relocate. Today's military professionals study Kowalski's innovation as a classic example of disruptive technology emerging from unexpected sources. His story is taught at military academies worldwide as proof that tactical brilliance can come from anyone, regardless of formal training or institutional position. Perhaps most importantly, Emil's legacy demonstrates that the most effective weapons are often the simplest ones, designed by individuals who understand fundamental principles rather than complex theories. His background in farming and mechanical repair provided insights that formal military education had missed entirely. The farmer's impossible weapon that silenced an entire battalion became the foundation for military systems that continue protecting soldiers 80 years later. In an age of artificial intelligence and autonomous weapon systems, Emil Kowalski's core insight remains relevant. The fastest response wins, regardless of how sophisticated the underlying technology. Every time a modern fire control system engages a target in milliseconds rather than minutes, it echoes the breakthrough achieved by a Wisconsin potato farmer who refused to accept that impossible problems required impossible solutions. Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas come from the most ordinary people, armed with nothing more than determination, ingenuity, and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. Emil Kowalski proved that genius isn't about credentials or education. It's about seeing solutions where others see only problems.